Before starting this, I just want to say that there will be quite a few sensitive topics mentioned in this video. I mean, the works I mainly discuss here take place in medieval times. Duh. If you're uncomfortable with any of the topics listed on screen, please leave this video now. Also, please don't harass or attack anyone who's involved with this project. Better for people to just block and leave them alone if anything. Thanks. Have you ever seen a project have so much potential, but then see it get squandered in real time? That's what Mobox87's FON/FPT did to me. A project that had quite a bit of potential, but due to issues in development, us fans of the work watched it die in real time. Watched it die a slow, painful death over the course of 6 to 8 years. For those unaware, Mobox87, also known as Goldbox on YouTube, is a FNAF YouTuber known for her projects such as the FNAF Affinity, her Hell of a Boss comic The White Sin, though going by an alter ego known as Nudie Noodles there, and her OC project Open Mind. She got into quite a bit of hot water when it was found out that she drew CP, showed Nazi fort to remind our audience, and Nazi art back in 2020 through 2021. With her Open Mind project, amongst other controversies that came about soon after. However, what if I told you there was CP in her work since the beginning? Not just with her OC content. FON, abbreviated for Faces of Nothing, also known as FPT, abbreviated for FNAF Playtime, or FNAF Mythology, is a cancelled RPG game with characters inspired by the ones within Mobox's FNAF Affinity, except instead of the animatronics within FNAF being animatronics, these characters would be humans or mythological creatures instead. This project was entirely separate from FNAF in that it had a story and lore completely different with the work it was based on, with it not being a horror game at all, just an RPG game with a few horror elements. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time. Like, a really long time. Since before I did my video about my experiences with Mob as a whole. This was a project that meant a lot to me and my friends, especially to me and my bestie. We've been following it since the beginning, and the fact that it's not talked about as much as Mobox's other projects like Affinity or FNAF anymore kind of saddens me a little, because in ways it was much better than Affinity, but not in the way that you think. This video will serve as an archive for everything related to the project, so likewise, it'll be quite long. For the sake of my and everyone else's sanity, this video will be split into 9 sections in which the timestamps and titles will be on screen. Warnings will be provided for each section where it requires it, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. For this section, I will be going over the plot and major story events in FPT/FON. This includes the world building within the first game. The second game, yes, there was a second game when the first never got released, will have its own section as there was very little known about it. Basically, main plot goes like this. Scott is a 17-year-old archer who lives in the Kingdom of Light known as the Sunset Kingdom, but the neighboring kingdoms are preparing a war between the monsters, or mythological beings, and the other kingdoms. The King of Sunset does not want this, so he sends Scott to try and remedy everything, but he doesn't know that he is facing something much worse. In FON, there were 5 kingdoms, plus a few that were abandoned, as well as a secret kingdom, the Kingdom of Sunset, the Kingdom of Darkfell, the Kingdom of Waterfell, the Kingdom of Morse, and the Kingdom of Treeveld. Some kingdoms were more focused on than others, leading for them to get more special treatment and development than others. This was especially true for the Kingdom of Darkfell, having it get the most story than the other kingdoms. The Kingdom of Darkfell consisted of 4 important characters: Lord Shadow, with his real name being Baxter, Lady Shadow, with her real name being Risk, Nightmare, Baxter's brother, and Beltran, the Prince of the Kingdom, with Beltran being the most important character in the kingdom. Baxter is the king of Darkfell and the brother of Edgar, who is the king of Sunset. Baxter is a tyrant who would kill anyone just to get his way, or for fun. He killed his father when he was 15 because he was jealous of him making Edgar the future king of Sunset. After Baxter killed his father, he was exiled until he got the power to rule over Darkfell, with Edgar teaching him the basics of ruling a kingdom. Risk is the queen of Darkfell, hailing from an abandoned kingdom known as Saishi, the kingdom of Snow. She was formerly a peasant girl, but Baxter forced her to marry him after she saw him kill a knight right in front of her because he kissed her hand. She never loved Baxter, but tolerates him in order to be a good queen to her people. With her son Beltran's death, things only grew worse for them. Nightmare is Baxter's brother, the knight of the kingdom and the one who convinced Baxter to kill his father. We'll touch more on him later. Beltran is the son of Risk and Baxter, but this is false. His true father is Nightmare. He used to be curious and extroverted until his death, which caused him to grow rather cynical. He created the Secret Kingdom, the Glitch Kingdom, as well as its inhabitants, the king being a combination of Baxter and Edgar, and is the god of death in official lore. Strange. I know. This was never explained. Baxter was a terrible king, ruler who loved executions, clearly didn't know how to rule. His subjects hated him due to the latter, so to prove them wrong, he joined a raid to the castle that they were planning, disguising himself as a civilian while others plotted to kill the rulers. During the raid, Baxter came towards the front yard of the castle with the civilians, and he had injured Nightmare. However, when Baxter saw that Beltran was playing outside with him, he was unable to do anything to him. Unable to kill Beltran, and the other rulers like the civilians wanted, they found out that Baxter had joined in on the raid and forced him to watch as they brutally murdered Beltran outside the castle. After Beltran's death, Beltran remained as a ghost, but Baxter and Risk's relationship only grew bitter, with Baxter abusing Risk and Baxter later finding out that Risk cheated on him with Nightmare to create Beltran. The details with this are murky, as Mob would flip-flop it saying, Oh, Risk wasn't fertile so they couldn't have a heir, or Baxter wasn't fertile so they couldn't have an heir. In some images I show, this is due to the fact that he's a ternero, or a calf. In FON, a ternero is like a guardian angel sent from a couple of the 17 gods of the world of FON, having a purpose to watch over the host and protect them. They are made to be the siblings, and soul in some cases, of the host. In Nightmare's case, Baxter is the host, and Nightmare is a ternero. Scott has a ternero as well. This is a character named Phantom Scott, who is the antagonist of FON. Phantom Scott was around Scott almost his whole childhood, brother that only Scott saw. Terneros start off like this for a while, until he had an accident from falling out a tree he climbed when he was 8 years old. The fall had caused him to forget about Phantom Scott, basically abandoning him, and have a bandage on his nose. Phantom Scott, thinking that Scott was dead, thought that he had failed his purpose to protect Scott, so he clipped his angel wings and began to hate Scott for forgetting about him. There's quite a lot more about Phantom Scott to know, but we'll get to this later. The Kingdom of Sunset consisted of 5 characters: Scott, our main protag, Fitz the Fairy, Scott's companion on his journey, Edgar, the King of Sunset, Baxter's brother, Freddy Griffin, and Tirza, the former king of Waterfell. Scott is our protagonist. We've already talked about him enough already, so let's just get to the others. Fritz is a fairy created by King Edgar to aid Scott in his adventures. If anything, he follows him around like Navi from the Zelda games. Like Scott, he can't feel love, but this is for different reasons. In Fritz's case, he can't love because he was created to only help Scott, whereas Scott can't love because he was born without a soul. He's much more cynical than anything, and didn't really have much of a personality. This will be a common theme with many of the characters. Edgar is the King of Sunset and the brother to Baxter. He never believed Nightmare was real and thought he was a figment of Baxter's imagination. He was the one who sent Scott to help stop the war. His wife, Helen, the former queen, was killed by pirates. He met Freddy in the forest, finding him hurt, and he allowed for him to take refuge in Sunset and protect the kingdom's gold. The king has 2 sons and 1 daughter, Prince Kitty, who lives in the forest with the bear the king used to have, Prince HK, and Princess Charlie. Freddy Griffin is Edgar's closest friend, the husband of Tirza and the one who protects Sunset's gold. Along with protecting gold, Freddy also knows about the Torneros, considering them dangerous and making a long essay about them, which I show on screen here. Tirza is Freddy Griffin's wife and the maid of the Sunset Kingdom. She fled from the Kingdom of Waterfell after King Moretti killed their daughter in a ceremony, cutting off her rabbit ears and marrying Freddy sometime afterwards, in which the two had a daughter together named Oceanus. Freddy Griffin knew that in the future the war between monsters and kingdoms would come, so he asked for God to send a sign to save his race. When Scott was born and it was noted that he didn't have a soul, Freddy deduced that God had given him that sign, which is why years later, when Edgar announced that they would kill the beings of the forest, Freddy prevented it for a while by remembering that Sunset is a peaceful kingdom, making an agreement with the monsters and the king to keep them away and not attack Sunset. But this was only temporary. Freddy wanted to live in peace, without hard feelings. People didn't accept that humans and forest beings could coexist, including the king, as he changed the rules and broke the agreement, so he recommended that Scott go to try and stop the war from happening and change people's minds, knowing that he was very brave and calm. When Scott was a baby, Freddy warned the parents that he must be well cared for so as to not cause the loss of the Sunset Kingdom. But this didn't happen, as his parents were kidnapped and killed by Baxter sometime in Scott's childhood. Other non-important characters of Sunset will appear on screen now. Now, here's where we get to the underdeveloped kingdoms. Let's begin. The Kingdom of Waterfell consisted of one important character, and that's King Moretti, the King of Waterfell. The king is always under a state of grief due to him losing the ones he loved. We know next to nothing about the kingdom except for the methods for becoming a citizen, we'll get to this later, and that the inhabitants have scales and can breathe underwater. The Kingdom of Morphs consisted of 2 important characters, King Lupin and his wife. Lupin's wife was burned at the stake as the kingdom's inhabitants thought she was a witch. We know nothing about this kingdom except for the methods for becoming a citizen. We will also get to this later, and that people in this kingdom are rather aggressive. The Kingdom of Treeveld consisted of 2 kings and 1 queen. Their parents died from a shipwreck and forced the King Niraj to marry his sister. Yes, it's incestuous and it was normalized within the events of the game, but we'll get to that later. Yes, they do have a son together. Sometime after the events of the main plot, Treeveld fell thanks to Darkfell. We know next to nothing about this kingdom except the ways of becoming a citizen. Each kingdom has their own different test for becoming a citizen, from birth to 10 years. This includes the test for Sunset. There is no longer a specific test for this section because since Freddy came, he has been the one who knows the future of people according to their soul. He will define the use for the child's future. In Darkfell, in the castle, the king has a podium full of somewhat wild canines. This is very gory. They put a newborn or infant on it so they can't get out. And they put the medal or seal of Darkfell on it, since this kingdom should only consist of brave people. If the infant manages to scare these canines, it will be a part of the kingdom. If not, the infant will be devoured by the canines. In Morse, a cross is drawn in the air. If it appears on the child's left side, it's a bad sign and they will have to expel him. If it appears on the right side, this person is a civilian. In Treeveld, the energy from the baby will be necessary to make a rose bloom. This must be done by the kings. If the rose is black, they will kill the baby. If it is any other color, well, the kings will decide. The most common is red. Waterfell doesn't have any tests until you are 11 years or older. From 11 years or older, these tests include, within Sunset, you will have to make something illuminate from a concentration of nothing. If you did not achieve anything regarding illumination, you do not belong to the Sunset Kingdom. Within Darkfell, you enter a dark room and you will be attacked by something unknown. If one survives, they will have to come out with bloody tears. If they die, then they simply did not belong in Darkfell. Within Morse, you have to have a fight with the king. The king knows a lot in martial arts and combat and will even dodge you. If you manage to hurt him, you will be accepted. If not, he will kick you out of the kingdom. Within Waterfell, this test will be done with 2 pairs of chopsticks and with 2 circular blades each on the chopsticks. The king will put the chopsticks in a vertical position, and the blades will be horizontal. The king will put them near both sides of your neck and cut a total of 4 holes, 2 on each sides of your neck. After this, he will guide you to a salty river and submerge you in it to see if you can resist breathing. Most die in this test, but despite this, there are many inhabitants of this kingdom. Apparently, the minimum that 4 people can endure underwater is 1 day, but the maximum that a child could do is 4 days underneath the same conditions. In tree belts, you have to grow a tree. If the leaves are green, it would be better if it was lighter, you are accepted into the kingdom. But if very dark leaves bloom, they will cut down the tree and they will throw you out of the kingdom. As I said earlier, there were 17 false gods in FON. A lot of the time they were represented by statues that people would come to and request things from. Some of these gods were worshipped in different kingdoms, while some others could be worshipped by everyone in FON. Only a few of these 17 false gods got designs, and these will be shown on screen now. Some of these false gods were parents to the Generos, such as Morbius and Calamus were the parents of Phantom Scott, and Bonter and Swarm were the parents of Nightmare. The lore of these false gods was very strange and not touched upon well. All we knew is that Calamus cheated on Morbius with Blomos after creating Phantom Scott, so Morbius killed Calamus due to the cheating, with Bonter getting mad at him for this, as Bonter was one of Calamus's many lovers, and cursing Morbius's face to look like how it does in FON. The game had 4 known builds, most of which were from 2016. First build was done in RPG Maker 2003. There isn't much gameplay documentation, but there's one screenshot depicting Scott and the Glitch King together. Despite this build was the one that has the most sprites shown off. A little while ago when I was bored, I converted them to fit in RPG Maker and got them to move again. Look at them go! The second build was done in Game Maker Studio. This build is one of the ones that we have the least information from, having only this picture of Scott's sprite and engine. The third and fourth were back to RPG Maker, specifically in MV. The third build is the build where we have the most gameplay screenshots from, and even a video of one of the endings, but not a lot of actual gameplay was shown. And the fourth has a very recently found screenshot, only this one gameplay screenshot to come of it. This came from an interview that the blog Mobox Critique, blog that documents and talks about Mobox's horrible behavior and projects, did with Mako, a programmer of the game. Mobox Critique did 2 interviews about FON and FPT, one with Mobox herself and the other with Mako. These interviews included insight on a bit of cut content and gameplay elements within the game. These will be read by me and some friends, so sit back and enjoy our narration of the text. How long did the story for FON take to plan out?
I remember that it started as a simple alternative AU from the lot of my FNAF AU. Once he started to get things quickly, I began to think more and more deeply about the idea of doing something great. But comics, no questions, no, it was impossible to explain everything and do things that would remain unquestioned. So I will say that the story took at least 2 years to make its first phase and 6 months to plan to expand it.
Were there any problems in game development besides the loss of progress?
There were many problems. One of them was the well-known Glitch Kingdom, which had not even been created. The Glitch Kingdom had various mixtures of all the kingdoms. This is due to the source code mixing the role of the 3 already created kings into one. It's a bit complex to explain, but I can say that the codes were confused in one. There was the Kingdom of Sunset in Darkfell, but already in another folder. The Glitch Kingdom had been formed. The folder was named something like WM170616XER. Why do I remember this? I know there were the initials of Windows and a random date. There was all the error inside, but Mako was able to handle it and we made the Glitch Kingdom.
Why were there 8 endings for the game? What were they and how could you get them?
I can't remember much since I lost a notebook, but I'll explain the few I do remember. There were 8 endings since the game would be long, and there would be long. There were even a lot of decisions. It was like even taking a strange stone. It would be a reason to have a new ending. Good ending. This ending made Scott talk to all the kingdoms and avoid a war between them and the forest monsters. This ending could be achieved by talking to all the kingdoms, even the snow one, and notify the monsters to appear in the meeting in the center of everything, Reign of Origin. Normal ending. The war would be avoided, but it would be found that the kingdoms would be reinforced. Since although there would be not a war, Sunset and Darkfell were prone to create one between them. The King of Sunset and the King of Darkfell did not have a good relationship. This ending was done by itself. If you talk to the main kingdoms, Wars, Sunset, Darkfell, Treeville, Waterfell, and if the number of monsters killed was low, in this ending, you should not kill any monster. Bad ending. This ending, it could be done if you talk to the major kingdoms and all the interactions were mean. Assaulting the kings would be representative of Sunset, and Sunset himself see it as if it was a statement of war. The number of monsters should be greater, and this it ends by notifying all the kingdoms ready to kill each other. PS ending. This ending could only be obtained with the help of a glitch that Mako had added. It could be easier for it in a room of mirrors. PS2 invade Scott's body, so there would be a new interaction with the king's kill.
Do you have any old progress you could show or concept art of the game/storyline?
Unfortunately, the only thing that remains are some notebooks with old designs. There was one in particular, but it's lost. All this in digital was lost due to the consistent format of my computer. Mako had the game 60% completed.
What was cut from the final project? Designs, ideas, parts of story, anything.
A lot of the things we decided to cut has been some joke endings, like Scott coming out of a sewer into the modern world, and coming back from a well he fell into, saying it was strange. Also some old designs like early king designs and some deleted kingdoms. There was a Kingdoms of Stone, which we thought would be better to add to FON 2, but as such we never got there.
What all was in the final project? Features, tasks, extra features. How long did it take to play through each kingdom?
I remember that we used to take each kingdom at least 2 hours, even if we knew the game. Sunset was the worst of all, since sometimes you had to do favors until dark fell and return until sunset. Crossing the lake and seeing King Edgar, what happened? There was a mission where you were traveling with King Baxter or Lord Shadow and his wife. The annoying thing was that he had to go to the set and you would have to follow him. There was a Shadow King health bar which would go down if Scott wasn't there to shed him with an umbrella. This took us hours as Baxter had to shop and the mission took at least 2 hours for each order that Lord Shadow made. These were eat something, visit an antique shop, talk to some townspeople and buy something. Finishing the game would take at least 11 hours in total. If you're an expert and knew all the recognizable facts, but finishing it for the first time, I think it would have taken more than 4 days if you wanted to unlock all its secrets.
What caused the team to change the name from FNAF Mythology to FPT to FON?
We all agreed to change the name as we wanted to respect Scott Cawthon and not take the franchise to do something like that. The team loved Scott as much as I did, so we decided to do a different project, but based on Scott's characters. The project and the idea of the name, Faces of Nothing, was for the same concept that Scott, or orphan adventurer, has strange memories, making him unaware of himself. Faces out of nothing. It is the representation of an essence that does not exist, but at the same time does. Scott always felt watched. For his inner eye, the tornadoes are considered a pest and hardly coexist with others. Considered to people as soulless people are ghosts. That is why the same representation of faces out of nowhere where the game wants to show the concept of the suffering of the Terneros.
What were some of the early kings and deleted kingdoms? Can you describe them?
The king of the Rock Kingdom was a stocky man based on a version of Freddy, always wearing brown armor. Also a king of a volcanic area who would wear a huge black tunic and white fur. He was a type of rabbit and human. But the old designs of the kings were looser. At first they would only have a robe of the respective color of the kingdoms. It was when we wanted to do something big and we made a custom design.
Were there any other favors / quests that had to be done in the game? Were these different for each kingdom? Were they?
It was a huge list that would take me to write, but I could put some. In Darkfell, the one mentioned. In Morse, you had to beat up some ruffians who was trying to invade the kingdom. The people of Morse were under a horrible effect of weakness, so Scott offered to help. At sunset, there was a horrible task of moving the sundial as a kind of puzzle. At Waterfell, there was large bars prevented the waters from flowing into the kingdom, so Scott would go on a long journey to turn the cranks and make the water fall into the kingdom again. But I do not remember very well one of the tasks in Treeville.
What was the unlockable / unlockable content? What would you do in the Glitch Kingdom when you could be able to travel there?
Many of the unlockables were obtained by collecting things like pages and drawings. These will give you sketches of the in-game designs and character models, as well as hidden cinematics, which pure Mako I can't tell. Main of the things to do was fight with various inhabitants to reach the king and queen. Once it was done, there would be an end, but I know that Mako was the one who would write this.
How many Terneros were there? It was said that Risk, the King of Waterfell, and May had one? How did they work?
There was a Ternero's information sheet. These were like the soul of a body that does not exist, but they live with a soul of an alien body. Many of them are physical, but they cannot feel pain or die. Even Nightmare could not die, just disappear to another location, but they were able to feel negative emotions all the time and very little happiness, so they searched for a body. They could reproduce, but it was quite dangerous. The compensations caused the children to have strange powers.
What strange powers would these children have? The only children of Terneros I know of are Beltran and Diane Habzillion. Did they, mainly referring to Beltran, have powers too?
The Terneros, they can reproduce for others, even with people with a body. There are conscious and a child of 2 of them may be possible. An ability that Beltran had as a son of Risk and Nightmare has been the power to create other worlds, as was a certain Wonderland, but this would be accessible only in FON 2 and mentioned in FON 1.
How long did it take for FON's coding to work? For example, the loading screens and the coding of each mission. Do you have any stories you can share about that?
I remember that the programming of the loading screen was something quite complex that was in my hands. It had taken me at least 5 hours to find a composing code. There were more complex loading screens, which in curtains used to close and open. This would help the game animation codes. The most terrifying loading screen was called the Darkness, since it was composed of the character in darkness to go to the next phase. But sometimes the code would fail, and it would only handle the torso of the body. It took me days to fix this screen. He only appeared in Darkfella. I spent hours, almost 5, just to make a loading screen that was perfect. I remember one time we even had to stay up at Bond's. She had made us lots of coffee and brought a dessert for us. At least that day I remember was as something funny.
What ideas were cut from the final project that you like and would like to keep? Designs, ideas, parts of stories, anything.
I remember we had a beautiful design for the Queen of Morse. A lady with long black hair and a long dress. I would say she was one of my favorite character designs. But I was consistent there would have been much use for her. There was also a kingdom made of flowers, which was connected to Travelve. I think that's what it was called. A pastel-colored kingdom with a rabbit king and a bear queen. Quiet, friendly, and homey attitude. But it wasn't like we could put more kingdoms just for the fun of it. The Water Kingdom had side quests that consisted of looking for things underwater, but we agreed something nobody likes water levels.
How many additional missions or features were in the final project? Features, tasks, additional features? How long did it take to create and play each kingdom?
I could conclude that there were almost 88 missions, 105 optional tasks. I remember this clearly because we had used that type of password in room 88105. We did a lot for the game, but there was tasks, some unimportant villagers, various tasks for the kings. I just couldn't say how long it took me to do everything. Well, in the end, I could tell you that I could see it as about 2 days, but others could say that it was 6 days. I was never quite good with the work schedule, but we used to take almost a couple of hours since we knew the game and how it worked. But when we put someone else in it, these hours increased.
How were the boss battles? How'd you code them? Was it different than the standard RPG Maker boss fights?
I could say that there were fights that looked like the type of Undertale, since I was quite involved in that fandom. But there were others referring to the common versions that we have in Pokemon. We used to change the battle scenario depending on the boss that it would face. There were even characters that were harder to defeat than 1 or 2 bosses.
Also, according to Mako, Hannah is actually the writer for FON, and Momboy made the character designs. So take of that what you will. There were 8 endings total, with the game taking about 180 hours to complete. These endings consisted of the Crimson Route. Phantom Scott has taken over Scott's body within this ending, who will destroy the kingdoms that, by the way, are constantly at war over the 6 people dead in each kingdom. This was a plot in the game called the 6 Sheep. 6 random people died in each kingdom. In Darkfell, it was Beltran and someone else. In Morse, it was the king's wife. In Waterfell, it was the king's daughter. And we don't know who died in Sunset and Treeveld or that other person who died in Darkfell. He will destroy everything for the simple reason to which he does not feel like he belongs with them. In the end, you will fight against Phantom Scott, who will say that he is the last being between him and Scott, who lives in the world. If you defeat him, he will just be at the ground full of pain, and he will say something like, he's never seen anyone beat him before. His entire HP bar will go down, and he will take a sword and end up stabbing himself and say, in the end, I was never the bad guy, and he blames Scott for his actions. Passive route. This route never got a name officially, but I just call it that since it's a route where you don't kill anyone. Scott must make a pact with both the beings of the forest and the kingdoms to live in peace. In the end, they will be in Sunset, celebrating that everything is back to normal again. The final boss is Phantom Scott again, but not as we know him. This time, he is some kind of angel. The neutral route. This is obtained if you only kill the mythological beings of the forest, and it will end with the king exiling you, and you will have to find a new place to live. It is unknown what the final bosses were for this ending. The invisible route. One of the options within the choice boxes within the game is to ignore. If you ignore everything by pressing that button, it will show you that you get an ending where Scott never existed. There's no final bosses here. The disorder route. There's a series of riddles within the game that you will have a choice whether to do or not. But if you complete them all, it means that you'll earn the secret ending. This ending is about Scott being in our current time, being urgently treated by doctors who will go desperately to Scott's stretcher, and Scott will keep screaming about Sunset, the king, yada yada yada, to which the doctors will respond that he keeps believing that this place exists. Scott, terrified, turns around the corner and sees Phantom Scott smiling at him, and you can see that he is in a psychiatric hospital. It is unknown what the final bosses were for this ending. The alternative route. If you give some reasons to Phantom Scott in an ending where you face him, he will cry and say that no one knows what it is like to be a tortured soul in a world full of loneliness. You can answer or deny it. It's better if you deny it, but if you agree with him in all his agonies, he will finally smile kindly and he will ask for your hand to lift him up. You have 2 options here. You can cut off his hand and kill him with his sword. After this, you will automatically win the neutral ending, but you will throw you away depending on how many you killed, and it will change why he threw you away if you accept his hand. But at the end, you will see Scott in different clothes talking with his friends. After this, they will leave, and Scott will turn around looking at the real Scott, trapped, asking for help, implying that Phantom Scott is now the body and Scott is now a soul. the trap route. Scott kills all the people of Waterfell, and the king, out of revenge, cuts him beyond the scales that he made, since Scott is one of those that can be in all the kingdoms, but he will only choose one. And he makes him be in chains that he dies in the ocean along with others who could not enter the kingdom. This final boss in this route is King Moretti. The King's route. Scott will kill all the kings, but only the kings, and he will take all the crowns, melt them down, and form his own. In this route, Scott is crazy for some reason. Treevelt's crown will create roots for being one of the noblest, apparently, even though this kingdom was incestuous, and Scott will end up with a root embedded in his chest, and thus becoming a dead king who dominates all of the kingdom. Despite the first game not even being released yet, the team planned a sequel for the game. This section will be quite short, given that there's not much information that was provided about this, also cancelled, sequel project. Basically, after Nightmare died and went to Bexar's body so that they would become one and the same, this is what happens after Gennaro dies. The only exception to this would be Phantom Scott, because he can't die. Baxter and Risk decided to have another heir. This was a girl named Elise. 8 years after the events of the passive route, which was considered the canon ending of FON 1, Scott is a great archer still, but there have been plagues. Yes, the plagues from the Bible that Edgar assigns you to stop. The main antagonist is completely different from FON 1, a sorcerer known as Scalum. The FON version of Dr. Solemn from another project of Mobox is known as Sassy's Palace, with Phantom Scott appearing at the end of the game in a new body, albeit in a rather gory way, typical of Mob. What was weird about this was that this sequel project was created in 2016, and Solemn was made in 2017. So you can see that some things were added, such as the plot and the main antagonist, later. All we know about is that it was going to be in 3D, and one of the quests was with Scott having to shrink down and go inside the dollhouse Baxter made for police to get a key that was needed to progress through the game. This was the main thing that was talked about on the FON blog. Regarding FON 2. As well, there were 4 new kingdoms, 3 of these kingdoms being abandoned, but one was named Fungi, something based off of Japanese culture. Yeah. The others were called the Sagratita Kingdom. This kingdom consists of and is characterized by depressive people. It was created after the fall of Treevelt, being what was left of its remains. It accepts monsters, but is known for having a children's cemetery in the village. The Taiyaga Kingdom, which is characterized by cruelty and excessive poverty. There are no nobles, and only the king and queen exists, who try their best at ruling, but realize that they don't want to help people who will ever come to their kingdom. It is noted as abandoned because of scarcity and the deaths within the kingdom. It does not accept monsters. And the Gouda Kingdom. Nothing is known about this kingdom other than the fact that monsters are prohibited. Remember how I mentioned there was incest in FON? Well, as shown in the last screenshot, FON was not immune to controversy. There are 4 things that could be rather considered strange and controversial with the project. Let's begin. On the FON blog, there was a comic that described the events before, during, and after Beltran's death. Notice how I say during. This comic has multiple pages of rather graphic child gore. They speak for themselves. It's theorized that Mobox and Dekoru have a fetish for gore, as these such things are seen quite often in her later works as well. On the FON blog, Mob showed off a rape art of Baxter and Risk that took place during the time period of FON 2. This will not be the only time that Mob has shown rape art to her audience of minors at the time, but we'll get to that later. The team of FON shipped Baxter and Nightmare together even though they were brothers. The fandom had a Fujoshi fit over it. Normalized incest, everybody. Wow. On Mobox's blogs, especially the Affinity AU, there would be arcs that would create a small story on the blog. FON blog was no exception. In this arc, infamously dubbed the Hole Arc, Scott gets trapped in a hole by Baxter. He escapes, and Baxter comes to Scott's house, choking and raping him. May I remind you that Scott is 17 and Baxter is around 28 years old? It seems that Mob need to be reminded of that. She never was, as it seems that she forgot Scott's age even though it was stated a few months prior to this arc. How do you forget the age of your protagonist in your own game? What? However, this arc was not met with backlash. No. The fans joked about it, even making meme images of the encounter. I understand that the fan base was full of minors back then, even Mob herself. But come on. You guys should have known better, that's disgusting. Real quick side note, while I was editing this part, I had noticed something really shocking involving Baxter, Nightmare, and Risk, and I was so shocked and so mad about it that I made a little edit. So, this is technically my reaction to that shocking thing. During the development of the game, Mob would often talk about paranormal things that happened to the team. Starting from July 21st, 2016, they would talk about cryptic messages that a supposed hacker would give to her team. Later on, they discovered that this wasn't a hacker, a spiritual being known none other as Phantom Scott. But this is not the Phantom Scott we know. No, this one had black hair and green eyes, kinda similar to his FON 2 version. This spiritual being would give them cryptic messages over text via WhatsApp and Facebook comments, with Mob talking about them through the blog. Fans have theorized that this could be a virus of sorts, and the team took that and ran with it. Talk about this a bit later, and these cryptic messages would lead to something like a poem that was originally written in the Zulu language, and the virus would make characters in the game be unable to move. Sometime later, this spiritual being grew only more and more angry, causing the people in the team to experience scary dreams about the spiritual being. This led to the team being unable to cope with this nightmare they were dealing with, thus being the thing that led to the game's cancellation. In 2021, Mob announced that the game was cancelled, selling all the characters along with it. Most of these characters went to 2 people. There was a third, but he's a pedophile and we don't talk about him. Yes, we do. His name's Davidoo, and he forced a ship of Belgian police on the people in the fandom, one of which being a groomer who got caught some years after. Mob still lets her buy characters, though, because she's her cash cow. I, too, had gotten some characters from FON out of this whole ordeal. The characters that I got were Phantom Scott, Morbius, Klames, Phantom Scott's parents, Bonter, a version of Beltran, and Krunkus, an adoptable that Mob made. Although Phantom Scott was the only character I received directly from Mob back when I still supported her. Adoptables are characters that people can buy with real money or with other things such as trading for other characters or for other pieces of art or written materials. After the cancellation of FON, Mob decided to profit a little for the work, making villager adoptables from both FON and FON 2. However, these adopts came at a price. Retconned lore. The retconned lore was very strange, some including, but not limited to, the Saishi Kingdom not being abandoned and having a princess, even though its only population consisted of the king, a merman who played a major role in the game but never existed until now, Baxter taking in a girl and training her to be a sorceress even though Baxter hates magic and wouldn't let his adoptive daughter learn it. Her name's Maya. She ran away from home after this event. She's really not important. A nanny who passed roles from Beltran and Belize to Beltran, even though Beltran and Belize never knew each other in the original canon, etc., etc. A lot of these adopts were designed actually on the spot, and they were never designed during the original canon. This was confirmed to be true during the most recent batch of adopts at the time of this video, as Mob had designed 2 of them to be like the executioners from Hell of a Boss. Since most of the characters of FON got sold around 74, it looked like this was the end for the project. But what if I told you that almost everything shown for the game itself was all fake? I am very well versed in RPG Maker. I've used the program for 4 years and made a 20 to 30 hour long game with my best friend in the program. So when it was stated that after the period of the Game Maker build, the project was an RPG Maker MV, this was stated in the interview with Mako that Mobox critiqued the program that I use, well, I got curious. But before we get to that, we must learn how this conclusion was reached. While looking for things to archive for another project Mob had made called Little Fan of the Big World, aka The Rescue Action, I had accidentally stumbled upon a now deleted video from July 2017 of Mob talking about the paranormal things that had happened with the game, saying that they were continuing. Which was funny, because it was said on the blog that the paranormal things stopped in 2016, with only Mob and Mako saying in the interviews that they were what led to the cancellation. I shall play this video now, transcribing in English to the best of my abilities, but afterwards I will get to the meat of it.
Buenos días a todos. Yo soy Mobox, creadora de videoo de FPT. Nada más venía a comentar que ahorita la situación está medio rara. Andaba haciendo dibujos para el videoo de Mobox, pero ya van como 3-4 veces que se me va la luz aquí en la casa. O sea, de la nada, y yo pues me quedé así como de, bueno, está bien, es normal que se vaya. Pero desde ayer le comenté a mi mamá, ya por fin le dije lo que estaba pasando de tren. Y es que, no sé, mi madre se enojó mucho. Bueno, o sea, no mucho que digamos, pero sí se enojó.
Y todo porque yo dije que maté a un niño de 8 años que ni siquiera existe, o sea, el cómic.
Pues ahora resulta que nada, todo bien normal. Le dije a mi mamá que no existía y todo eso. Y ya. Le deseé buenas noches y ya, se fue. De repente que revegué la imagen esa de Phantom Scott, que estaba todo glitcheado. Nada, pues sí se me hizo raro. O sea, me comentaron que eso era extraño en una imagen guardada. Yo sigo pensando que era por el fondo. O sea, los pixeles no se guardan muy bien, pero o sea, quién sabe. Luego la imagen, otra imagen, buscaba una imagen de Phantom Scott y la imagen se movía de arriba para abajo como si además tuviera un tic nervioso. Pero nada, me fijé y en pie de escritorio y seguía igual. Y luego probé y dije, a lo mejor es un error de mouse. O sea, si yo pongo en otra foto, a lo mejor ya sé lo mismo. Nada, no pasó nada. De hecho, me he estado preocupando bastante. Me encanta el blog, me gustaría seguirle. Pero ahorita no sabría muy bien qué hacer con el tema de Phantom Scott, porque cada que vamos con el juego y cada que vamos haciendo, no hemos hecho nada mi hermana y yo, y cada que yo hago imágenes para el video que preguntan a PS, no sé, de repente se torna todo muy extraño. Y es que no quiero meterme en problemas. O sea, luego también le comenté ayer en la noche a mi madre acerca de que pasaban cosas raras con él. Y yo le dije que era un personaje que yo había creado y no sé, se lo tomó muy aterrador. Mi mamá dijo que rezara para que se calmara. Pero ya cuando era muy noche, pues tomé su consejo, puse esas imágenes y empecé a rezar. Y de nada se funde, todo se funde. O sea, no sé si el problema es aquí o dónde. Porque ya había comentado esto con 2 muñecos de otro build. Y pues sinceramente no sé qué hacer, chicos. Ya me he preocupado bastante. En este momento ando yo sola. Y quería grabar esto pues para aprovechar de que no hay nadie. Porque tengo confianza de que esto puede acabarse muy pronto. Y no me importa, o sea, quiero acabar el juego. Pero no sé qué cosas me esperen en el futuro, tanto con Phantom Scott y con Betren. Y hace rato esta Mako, no sé si ya recuerden, la chica que antes me estaba ayudando para hacer el juego, me llamó en la mañana, antes de que me fuera a presentar el examen de literatura. Me llamó en la mañana y me dijo que si podía ir a su casa a recoger los bocetos del juego. Y pues nada, yo le pregunté que por qué. Y ella me dijo que Raquel le llamó y le dijo que seguía teniendo pesadillas. Desde hace mucho no las tenía y ahorita volvieron. Y o sea, y era con el mismo personaje, el Phantom Scott. Y pues nada, o sea, no sé qué decir. Yo nada más me asusté y ella me pidió que no yo... Algo me dijo, es que no sé muy bien. Y nada, pues ahorita estamos en eso, no sé muy bien qué vaya a pasar en un futuro. Ya cuando se acabe el juego, ya cuando lo saquemos. Mi madre me convenció para que no lo hiciera, pero ya mi hermana y yo estamos emocionadas por hacerlo. Así que... pues no sé qué vaya a pasar. Pues nada, yo espero que Raquel esté bien y que no tenga ya esos sueños de nuevo. Y que Mako... Ya le dije a Mako, ya había dicho a Mako hace unos momentos que no iba a poder pasar, que ya si quería los quemara e íbamos a hacer mi hermana y yo los dibujos, los bocetos, como quien diría. Pues nada, chicos, espero mucho el apoyo de que podamos acabar esto y que no pase nada malo cuando lo saquemos. Y pues muchas gracias por tomarte los 5 minutos por escuchar. Muchas gracias.
Did you catch that? Why would they say that they were excited to work on the game if there was a paranormal threat over them? Why would they say to Mako, the game's only programmer, hey, can you do something else for us instead, like working on sketches? Not to mention the inflection of the tone in her voice. As well, the coherence of narration makes no sense. You explain that the lights went out, which they go out all the time, this is nothing new in her area. Then that you said something accidentally to your mother that angered her, and then you talk about the paranormal stuff with Phantom Scott. Afterwards saying you're excited to make the game despite the warnings given? Excited for work that threatens your team? That makes no sense. Why talk about angering your mother accidentally when it has nothing to do with the paranormal stuff at all? Why be excited to make the game if it's a threat to you? With this now known, we can infer that the paranormal stuff involving Phantom Scott, as spoken about in the prior section, was all faked by Mobox and her team in order to garner attention and sympathy from her young, impressionable audience. As well, with me now knowing this, I decided to dig a bit deeper, looking into the gameplay video, screenshots, and sprites that were featured for the third build of the game. For the video, I will show the whole thing, but I will pause it periodically to add what's suspicious about it. As I've stated before, I'm very well versed in RPG Maker. I used RPG Maker XP, MV, 2003, and VX Ace, with MV being my specialty. The text boxes don't disappear like they do in the video. I will use me and my bestie's own game as an example of how they actually work. now back to the video. Did you catch that? That is a Movie Maker fade-out transition. I know Movie Maker because I edit my web show with it. This video is not done in Engine. This whole thing was animated in Movie Maker. Anyway, back to the video. You see those yellow splotches in the red kill text? Words in RPG Maker nor text boxes don't normally do that, especially since there wasn't any yellow in the word when the text box was displayed. You can see that it was just copied from the kill text in the previous text box with the text box, and the other word just being hidden from another layer and this kill text just being recolored red. If there wasn't any yellow in this text, this would have been perfectly done. Now, to the gameplay screenshots themselves. Do you see Phantom Scott and Scott's sprites? These have white spots in them. RPG Maker doesn't allow this to happen, but instead makes the white parts of the sprite transparent within your sprite editor. With this being a common theme in both sprites, you can infer that these screenshots are also fake. This is the same thing with the background as well, with the trees also having white splotches in them. The only way that you'd be able to have white splotches in your sprites like this would be if you were to manually fill them in yourself. But given with how this white splotch placement is, this wasn't the intention. She just forgot to color them the same color as the background. This will be touched upon more later. Now, onto this menu sprite with Phantom Scott. The censor was apparently meant to be some text box. Why censor it? There's a menu that was inspired by this one as well in me and my besties game, but RPG Maker doesn't have this kind of image compression. Despite looking a little pixelated, it looks much more clean and crisp than this menu for the FON game. Also, the font used in these images is Fixis. It's not to prove it to be fake, I'm just pointing that out for people to know what font is used in these images. There are two other gameplay screenshots from this build, but these are also fake. The giveaway is this top part of the screen. If you darken the image a little, you can see it shows Project FPT at the top. However, in the game's files within GameMaker, it was shown to be called Faces of Nothing. Nothing related to the original name, FNAF Playtime, as it was never officially called FPT, as shown within the screenshot within the second build. I've tested this version of GameMaker that was used in the second FON build. It doesn't have the project name in the middle of the screen. In fact, it doesn't show the project name at all within testing the game. All versions of RPG Maker are similar, with the name of the project being on the left-hand side of the screen while testing the game and not the middle. As well, these sprites seem to be redrawn, being slightly different than the ones shown in the screenshots from earlier. I bring this up because they're in the same pixelated style that doesn't work with RPG Maker, or Game Maker in fact. Game Maker can be pixelated, but it's not as noticeable as something with an MS Paint. Added on to the fact that the only way that you can have the title of the project in the center of the screen would be if it weren't a project, but a photo. Case in point, all of these screenshots of gameplay are not in-engine, but instead are images drawn with an MS Paint made to look like they were gameplay screenshots. Speaking of gameplay screenshots, also carried on to the most recent screenshot shown within the interview with Mako and Mobox Critique. This one is more obvious. The text within the text boxes doesn't line up with how a real game's text boxes work. The text in a normal game is in a neat order, whereas with this one, words been placed throughout is raised slightly higher than the rest of the text and does not have coherent spacing like the rest of the text, as if it were added on there but not edited well. Closing tab doesn't line up with how normal computer closing tabs look. The red X is smaller than how it should normally be, and there's no minimize or maximize tab. If the Windows tab had a black color, these things would have a white outline. Not to mention, this little black line that you would think is the section in between the new tab, but it's actually not, as the bush continues alongside it. With games in RPG Maker, specifically in MV, you cannot zoom in on your maps as closely. Considering that Mako and Mob said this was done in RPG Maker MV, I would know this very well. The sprites that were shown off within the third build are the same way. This template I used for making a sprite be at least 2 sprites tall in RPG Maker MV. I used this template to get the correct sizing and positions for sprites in me and my bestie's own game. Your background on these sprites must always be transparent and not be filled in. Otherwise, the background on your sprite will be white instead of transparent, and it will be a disaster for you. Now, I'm going to show both of these sprites within the template. If these are real sprites, they must be no bigger and no wider than the ones on the sprite sheet. Well, there you go. This sprite was specifically made to look transparent and small in the blog page, but if you copy it and put it in your photo editor, you can clearly see it was faked. Also, these sprites have to be slightly scaled down in order to fit within the correct sizing of the sprite sheet. If this were a real sprite, it would look like this. It's the same way with this one, except this one has light splotches like the sprites in the fake gameplay screenshots in the third build. In conclusion, everything past the Game Maker build was faked. Mob and her friends simply were focused on other projects during the time, as shown in the Affinity blog, and that's what led to the cancellation of the project. They only used the stories of paranormal things to garner attention to the blog, making promises that they were never able to achieve. The only things that were real were these screenshots here alongside these sprites from the first build, as well as the intro sequence, which was proven to be real, but these were from the first build of the game, not in the Game Maker build, as seen in these 2 screenshots. However, for some odd reason, they were using Game Maker 1's pixel sprite editor to make these intro sequences. It's possible this intro sequence was a segue into the Game Maker version to transition out of RPG Maker 2003. But I can show you something that wasn't faked. Me and my bestie made a video game that was inspired by FON/FPT called Crimson Snow Deluxe, and you've been hearing its soundtrack throughout this video. Make something real inspired by something fake than have nothing at all, and the fun OCs I got from Mob has been repurposed for this project, with new stories and lore thrown into the mix to keep things fresh. This game has a plot and characters that are entirely different from FON and free of stuff like the CP and normalized incest that was in the work of FON, but there's a few little Easter eggs inspired by FON/FPT as a homage to the project, and this was one of the main things that inspired us to make this game possible in the first place. If you would like something to scratch the itch you'd have for FON/FPT, or if you're just looking for a challenging RPG game to play, you can download on Steam or itch.io for free on Windows PCs or your Steam Deck. It's 20 to 30 hours long, as replayability is highly encouraged. Be sure to read the instruction manual, ask for help in the discussions tab on Steam, or in the comments on itch.io if you're stuck on a part or if you find a bug within the game. We'll help you out and or remove the bug as soon as possible. We hope you enjoy your game if you're able to play it. Even Mob commented on it on the interview with MobCrit, but her comment also showed that parts of FPT were faked, as she said that she wasn't an RPG person, even though FON is an RPG. Why make an RPG game if you're not into RPGs? Like, I don't understand that. What? Was it just to capitalize off Undertale popularity? A lot of the things in FON were clearly inspired by Undertale, such as the plot, or with Phantom Scott being slightly similar to Kara, but Mob has gone on record to deny this multiple times on the FON blog, even though Mako had confirmed that FON was inspired by Undertale in the interview with Mobox Critique. So, girl, just admit you were inspired by Undertale. Come on now, it's not hard. Thank you so much for watching this video. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, as FON was a project that me and my friends were very passionate about. Making this video just gave me a lot of closure on the project of FON, and I'm very glad I was able to make it not just for myself, but the people who cared about FON/FPT back in the day as well. Remember one of my earlier videos that I said I had a surprise for you guys? Well, while making that video, I was said to be a beta tester for FON, because the team said they were making a new build. And I couldn't tell anyone about this due to the threat of being kicked off the project and it being cancelled. They were going to release the build, but I was originally going to show it off to the public anyway and release it via the Internet Archive so the whole community would be able to play it. But once I found out the vast majority of the project was faked, I backed out and the project got cancelled. As it turns out, there wasn't a new build in the first place. They had just drawn a mock-up title screen on the side and no sprites to prove anything, as Mob was focusing on her hell of a boss stuff she was making under a new moniker. Again, it was all just an empty promise. If you would like a safe place to talk about FON, then go follow the Mobox Critique blog on Tumblr as they're back from their hiatus. They were the ones who did the interviews with Mob and Mako about FON 2 years ago. However, they don't support Mob and neither do I. We, and that includes myself, as I'm the archivist for this blog, have seized all communication with her once finding out that FON was faked. I'm not friends with Mob, and I haven't been friends with Mob since all that she did to me and to others. Even if she tried to make things right with me, I'm still not her friend. Especially not after all this stuff. I only used to talk to her because I wanted stuff for FON, and that's it. It's over. We're done with those things. I don't want to talk to her anymore after what she did with this, and especially since she fooled not just me, but her whole audience as well. Don't trust what she says about these things. Don't trust what she says about FON. If you would like an alternative to FON that's actually real or just looking for a good RPG game to play, then play Crimson Snow Deluxe. It will certainly scratch that itch you once had for the project that lost so much potential. That will be all I will have to say for this video, so good night everybody.
Look what you did. You snored all in my recording. Do you have anything to say for yourself? You sorry?